Yes. Um, but Mr. Kemp, do you think they actually plan to stop at any point, or they will continue move forward as long as they will be allowed?
Well, I think there are two issues. The first one is how badly Ukraine can hurt them and hit them and do damage to them and cause harm to them in the way, for example, they did on the in the attack against the strategic air fleet. And of course, if there are more of those sort of operations which bring home the war to the Russian people, so it can't just be seen as isolated to Ukraine and is seen directly as affecting Russia itself, as we saw both in the drone attacks and also in the attack into Kursk. The more of that can happen, the more painful it becomes for Russia itself. That does present a challenge to Putin, and maybe that will cause him to get what he thinks he wants, maybe a limited amount of his ambitions, and then stop. The other thing, of course, that really does need to happen is that the West, particularly the United States, needs to inflict as much damage and harm on Russia as it can. And there are two ways to do that. The first way is by giving Ukraine all of the munitions, all of the weaponry that it needs and that can be provided, and of course the freedom to use those weapons to attack inside Russia itself. And that will be very damaging to Putin. The more that he sees the United States and the West willing to continue supporting Ukraine, and even stronger support for Ukraine, the better. And the second way, of course, is economic damage. Sanctions and other economic action have been attempted since the war began, but they've been relatively limited. They need to be unleashed in full to, for example, to disconnect Russia from the international banking system, to interdict Russia's ghost fleet that it uses to export oil, and to comprehensively sanction Russia in a way that hasn't happened. That, of course, is a problem for the West, because pretty much all of those measures will also be damaging for the West. But I think the West needs now to bite the bullet and accept the fact that, yeah, there is going to be economic damage to the West as well, but it's much harder for Russia, and it will potentially deter Putin from continuing, because, of course, Putin's economy is not in a good shape now, and it needs to be put into an even worse shape.
But Mr. Kemp, do you believe that the United States can do that damage towards Russia under Trump's administration?
Well, I think one of the strengths of Trump is that he's extremely unpredictable. He's a very volatile character. And if he suddenly decides, as he might do, that enough is enough, he's tried his best to bring about a peace agreement with Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. Russia has refused to do so. It's kind of attempted to mollify him by playing along with it, but not actually being serious. And if he sees that and realizes he's being made a fool of by Russia, then, you know, I think he could easily turn and you know, effectively take his revenge on Russia by providing even more support to Ukraine. And I think that's a possibility. We'll have to see. It's, you know, I'm not in a position any more than anyone else is to predict what President Trump's mood is going to be.
Yeah, as a lot of experts in Ukraine and abroad saying that if you see the person who can predict the actions of Trump, they are lying. So yeah, I fully understand your position. You know, Mr. Kemp, many say Moscow is pushing for a ceasefire just to regroup, just to, you know, win the time. How much time would Russia need to reset, rearm, and strike again?
Well, I think the reality is that while it can, Russia will continue to push forward in Ukraine to take whatever ground it feels it needs to be able to say we have achieved our objective here. You know, we recognise there's been a lot of sacrifice on the part of Russians, but we've achieved what we need to achieve in Ukraine, and then maybe accept a ceasefire, particularly if under great pressure from the West. Then, of course, it's again really an unknown how long Russia will need how long Putin will need to regroup, reorganize, and strike again. I don't think there's any doubt that that once Putin has, if he does, has ceased fire in Ukraine, allowed at least a temporary cessation of hostilities there, then I don't think there's any doubt he will have another go. And he may have another go at Ukraine later, maybe in a year or 2 years or more or less, we don't know, or indeed at NATO territories, like, for example, the Baltic states or Romania potentially. But I think there's no doubt that with his ambitions for a restored Russian Empire, he's not going to stop until he either dies or is removed from the office of president. He's going to be a continual threat to Ukraine and, of course, to the entirety of the West, particularly in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, and Mr. Kemp, your recent piece titled "Putin Nuclear Revenge Attack Will Force Ukraine Surrender." These are the 4 ways he'd strike. That was actually, for me and for a lot of Ukrainians, was impossible to ignore. And it laid out in stark detail just how real the threat of nuclear escalation has become and why the West can no longer afford to look away. If Putin truly believes a tactical nuclear strike could break Ukraine's will to fight, how close are we to that scenario from your perspective?
I'm not sure we're close to it. I was really laying out a possibility, and I think it is a distinct possibility. Putin's talked a lot about nuclear retaliation against Ukraine and against the West, and I don't think it's outside the scope of his capabilities or his evil intent to use tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine. I think it's a possibility. I'm not suggesting we're close to that now. It may not even happen, but I think we have to bear in mind those possibilities, and we need to take whatever action we can, or prepare to take whatever action we can if that does happen.
Yeah, but I was thinking maybe you have some insights from someone. As a former military commander, you probably have them, some sources.
Yeah, of course. I keep in close touch with what's happening in Ukraine. But again, I don't think it's in a way a bit like Trump. You can't really anticipate exactly what Putin's going to do. Only him in his own mind knows what he will really do. He's certainly frightened the West by threatening nuclear action. And that's one reason why under President Biden and the European leaders, they were afraid to give Ukraine the support that it really needed. They gave enough to Ukraine to defend itself as far as possible, but did not give enough to Ukraine to strike back effectively against the Russians in a strategic fashion. And they could have given more, but they were afraid of escalation. And so it's an unknown quantity. I think it's something that should be borne in mind, but I'm not suggesting that use of tactical nuclear weapons is something that is either inevitable or necessarily that likely. It's a possibility.
And also in your recent remarks, you said Britain should help Ukraine develop its own nuclear capability, and that without it, true deterrence is possible. Is it time to break the global silence around this issue? And what would such cooperation even look like? How do you see this Kyiv and London cooperation?
Yeah, I mean, the nuclear weapons are still a very potent deterrent against anybody. And NATO has its own nuclear umbrella provided by the United States and by the UK. So NATO countries are to an extent shielded by our US and UK nuclear capabilities. France also has a nuclear capability, but those are not currently available for any use except for the direct protection of France itself, whereas UK and US have a broader nuclear shield. Obviously, the effectiveness of any deterrent, including the nuclear deterrent, depends on political will. And of course, if Putin would be afraid of nuclear weapons, but he would be less afraid if he doesn't believe that in the West there is the will to use them. And I think that is a big question mark. But I don't see any reason myself. I think it's unlikely that the US will extend its nuclear shield to Ukraine. I don't see any reason why the UK shouldn't do so in a bilateral arrangement. If it can extend a nuclear shield over NATO countries, then it can also extend its nuclear shield over Ukraine. and I can